Right, good evening. Thank you all for coming. It's lovely to see so many of you here. And it's lovely for us to be here, back in Sunderland, where the blizzard was born 2.5 years ago in Fitzy's, just on the other side of the river. And when we launched here, people said, is it not a bit odd to launch a literary football magazine in Sunderland? And maybe at first sight, it does look a bit odd. But then you think about it, and the first secretary of the Football Association, Charles W. Alcock, he was born in Sunderland. He was the man who devised the FA Cup. He established international football. He was a huge influence on the early laws of the game, one of the first great writers on the game. In a sense, in a very real sense, modern football was invented here in Sunderland. If the blinds weren't closed, you could look down at the riverbank. It was here, 1,500 years ago, that the Venerable Bede was born. St. Peter's Church, just behind the university there. He grew up there. We know he studied there. We know he wrote there. And we know he wrote there because if you look in the annals of the monastery, you can see when they had to buy more cows because he wrote on vellum, on cowhide. Which does make you wonder what the other monks thought. You're going into the refectory every night. What's for dinner? It's beef again. Come on, the sea's just there. Can we have fish just once? Sorry, Bede's writing. But of course, the thing he wrote was the ecclesiastical history of the English people, and by doing so, he wrote the first work of English literature. So, in an even more real sense than football, English literature was born here in Sunderland. So when people say to me, was this not an odd place to launch a literary football magazine? I say to them, no, there is no more logical place than here. So it's for these reasons we're very, very proud to come back, very pleased to be here. Let me introduce the panel. We've got Philippe Auclair on the end. He's France Football's correspondent in London. He's the biographer of Eric Cantona, and his most recent book about Thierry Henry will be out in time for Christmas. So that's a great Christmas present if you haven't already bought all of my books. Iain Macintosh, the creator of Bobby Manager, freelance journalist, works for the newspaper in Singapore. And his book, Football Manager Ruined My Life, about his addiction to computer management games, that's coming out in a week?
2 days.
2 days, even more exciting. But it's already selling ridiculously well on Amazon, so please carry on contributing to that. And our host for this evening, from the Football Ramble, the biggest and the best independent football podcast, certainly the best podcast I'm not on, Marcus Speller.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming, ladies and gentlemen, or lady and gentlemen, should I say. We're going to be obviously doing some Q&A stuff with yourselves, the audience. We've got some questions on Twitter, and I've got some questions from myself to ask the Imperious panel next to me. So we're going to kick off proceedings, before we get to yourselves, with some Olympic football chat. While the gold medals have been coming in, there has been some Olympic football. Team GB were involved, and they went out on penalties. Jonathan, I'll come to you first. What do you make of the whole GB experiment? Did it work? Would you like to see it again?
No.
Right.
Should football be part of the Olympics? It's been part of the Olympics for well over 100 years. I think women's football particularly benefits from being in the Olympics. And if you had a women's tournament without a men's tournament, I think that would look very strange. But I do think it's a horrible hybrid competition to be an under-23 competition with 3 overage players. It just means that different countries take it with incredibly different degrees of seriousness. And I think the whole hoo-ha over whether Beckham should be picked, and then picking Giggs having not picked Beckham, showed the confusion about how seriously GB should take it. Whereas Brazil, for instance, clearly are regarding this as absolutely essential to their World Cup preparation. Then you hear stats like South Korea apparently played 18 friendlies with this squad, which is 18 more than Great Britain. So I think it's a problematic tournament. It's neither fish nor fowl, and I think actually the standard of football by and large has been pretty poor.
Well, Philippe, we were talking on the way up. Do you think that football has been in the Olympics since 1900? Mm-hmm. A while. Would you like to see it continue? Jonathan's saying there perhaps it's
not in its present format. I think what Jonathan is saying, it's a bastardized version of the game. And the other thing, which is I think has been a downer for this particular competition, is that the Team GB experiment has been a complete failure. You could say, I mean, one of the most striking things for me has been the contrast between the way that since the very first second of the games, the opening ceremony, where there seems to have been suddenly a country finding itself, thanks to Danny Boyle's marvelous mise en scène, and that the whole of the team, in a way, has got into that spirit, and the only part of the Team GB that hasn't is the football team, and it feels like something that's been just stuck on top, and is very, very ill-fitting. And in terms, I mean, the importance of the Olympic Games, I mean, what you were talking about Argentina, you were talking about Brazil, you could talk about Argentina, Uruguay. It's very obvious that it is a competition that is not taken seriously outside of South America, when you look at the way the teams have been preparing for it.
I just think Africa.
Okay.
What Nigeria did in 96, what Cameroon did in 2000.
I suppose I meant in Europe, supposedly the powerhouse.
I think in Asia as well, the fact Japan and South Korea both got to the semi-finals, I think there's a real pride there that again, we're seeing this kind of incremental development and improvement in Asian football. And actually now there's a pretty good argument that Asian football has surpassed African football as being the third continent. The argument against that is it's two countries and maybe Australia. But if you look over the last 10 years, I think Asian football, their performance at the World Cups has been better than the African sides, despite there being more African teams in the World Cup. And the fact that two semi-finalists, if one of them could have gone on and done what Nigeria did in 96 or Cameroon did in 2000, then that would have been a huge step forward for Asian football. But I mean, we're talking development at quite a low stage as a serious football tournament.
The problem is the same for any discipline for whom the Olympics is not the major event. And for women's football, it is the major event, I would say, probably superior to the World Cup. When it comes to the men's game, it just doesn't make any sense.
But and I do see that point, but if you go on including sports for which the Olympics is the pinnacle, then you lose basketball straight away, because it's probably...
We'll carry on.
I'm scared now.
It is the pinnacle.
You lose boxing.
No, because amateur boxing is a completely different competition, played with different rules. The 3 times 3 minutes rounds. It's a different intake. It's also a great Olympic tradition, which you wouldn't find in the case of football. Basketball, I will disagree with you, because since the game is concentrated almost entirely in the USA, as they take all the best players, there is no truly international competition other than the Olympic Games. And it was, of course, the whole debate around 1992 Barcelona, when the Dream Team was allowed to participate and NBA players were supposed to participate, which, by the way, it might be the last Olympics in which they are allowed to participate. Yes, it is still the global tournament. Men's football was completely outside of it, as would golf, for example.
Yeah,
and you could argue with tennis as well.
Yes, I was going to bring tennis up as well. And the point with basketball is the NBA, the commercial machine that is. And I do accept your point as an international tournament, but the NBA probably outstrips it in profile. But that doesn't necessarily mean there isn't room for something. I mean, I was actually really looking forward to the Olympics.
An under-21 tournament, perhaps?
Absolutely. We can make a phone call. We can get this sorted tonight, I think.
Well, I mean, I was at the Under-20 World Cup in Colombia last year, which was actually a very enjoyable tournament, very good tournament. But it sort of passed beneath the radar here. And, to the extent that 36 players who are eligible, who Brian Eastick, the coach, would have liked to have called up, were withdrawn by their clubs. I mean, Sunderland actually were very good in allowing 3 players to go. I think no team better than Sunderland allowed that many players to go. So perhaps if you move that into the Olympic space, then it fulfills 2 functions, and it does have a role, and maybe would be taken more seriously.
So you can imagine FIFA and the IOC working together?
Sorry. I do feel that this was a massive missed opportunity for the British, though, because when you look particularly with the South Americans at the way they develop their international teams, the way that they have the under-17s, under-18s, under-19s, and they have the progression there, when they have a gap in their senior squad, they don't call up Jay Bothroyd like we did. They pull someone out of the under-21s. They throw them in there because they know that they know the mentality of tournament football. And we had an opportunity to slip into that and give our young players a proper tournament to get their heads around. And we fell between 2 stools. But as soon as I heard that Beckham wasn't in it, I thought it was a good decision. That was a shame, because the man's been shaking hands and kissing babies for 7 years. A subs appearance might have been nice, but are you going to pick a 37-year-old for what is essentially a youth tournament because he's pretty and he'll sell posters? But then they picked Giggs. And the man ran out of steam before the end of the tournament. There could have been something there. It could have been, as we're all kind of angling in the direction of, a great youth tournament and a chance to give kids this experience. And it fell between two stools for me.
Well, and adding overage players. I mean, you talk about South American nations being very good at drafting in under 21 players, bringing them through. I don't think any nation in the world is as good at doing that as Uruguay since Oscar Tabarez took over in 2006. He's made that a real policy that under 17s and 19s and 21s or under 20s, under 23s, depending which confederation he's playing under, then the senior team, that you do have that constant progression. And yet, look at Uruguay, look at how bad they were, and look particularly at how bad Cavani and Suarez, two of the overage players, were, basically because they couldn't be bothered because they know they have major European seasons coming up. Alvaro Rios, who's just got his move to Palermo, he was a bit better, but not really enough to justify taking the place of an underage player.
So Olympic football, we're not sure whether Stuart Pearce will be back in 4 years or not, but maybe give the youth more of a chance, but ultimately inspire a generation. Should we have some questions from the floor? David's got the mic. So if anybody's got a question, raise your hand towards the sky.
Obviously, Olympic football is thrilling everybody.
Yeah. Well, you can talk about whatever you want. There's a couple of people over here. Wait for the microphone to get to you, which will be on its way very, very soon. Here we go. The man you've given the mic to, probably to start first. Sorry. Hello, sir.
I actually enjoyed the women's football because it's the first time I've had a chance to see some of the more international teams.
Yeah.
And other than Martha, I've been pretty impressed with the standard.
Yeah, indeed. I was at England-Brazil, and I thought, Britain-Brazil, and I thought it was excellent. Chaps, have you seen any of the women's football?
The Canada-USA game, yes, which we saw quite a bit of, which was absolutely thrilling. But again, it is an Olympic sport. It does belong on the Olympic stage. And you could even say when Team GB had a reasonable tournament.
Absolutely.
It was great fun to watch. France-Japan as well was a real thriller. No, it had absolutely everything.
I think to see 78,000 people in Wembley for a women's game was phenomenal. And the atmosphere was fantastic as well,
But there's one thing perhaps which should be mentioned because, we were talking about it. I think the average crowd for the tournament has been 44,000 per game.
Yeah, which is the highest for any Olympic football tournament ever. With the possible exception of 1980 in Moscow when the figures are questionable because they played women's games and men's games back to back, as the crowd figure incorporates both. I think something about women's football that when you're trying to assess the standard of it, I know, obviously if you look at other women's sports that do work, things like tennis or athletics or golf, it's essentially the same as a men's sport, but less powerful. And there's no reason why women's football shouldn't ultimately become that. I think the problem when you're comparing it to the men's game is that men's football's been professional for 124 years now. Well, women's football's only just becoming professional. So really, possibly the comparison we should be making is to the upper level of the men's amateur game, not to the men's professional game. Right. When you do that, it suddenly looks like it's way ahead of the curve of development. I guess that's saying, again, it's an amateur sport and therefore has its Olympic place.
But the improvement has been exponential.
Oh, absolutely. It has improved radically over the last 10 years. I would agree with that as well.
Very much so. Another question, the man in the tie.
Is there a worse coach who has been consistently employed than Stuart Pearce?
I'll wade in with Steve Keane. Chaps?
Avram Grant. Hands down, Avram Grant.
On and off the pitch, yeah. But,
Raymond Dominic?
Oh, yes.
Has he been consistently appointed or was appointed once and then kept with stubbornly?
Yes. That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
By God, he was bad.
He was terrible.
Was there a second part to the question? Sorry.
If you have a legitimate expectation that you want to win the tournament,
the
selection of Giggs isn't the issue. The appointment of Pearce is the issue because he's never won anything. He has a worse win record at Man City than Joe Royle.
He also had the extraordinary record at Manchester City of, I think, not scoring a single home goal from January the 1st to the end of the season, didn't he?
Super.
Which is alarming.
And he played David James up front.
Yeah.
Which I felt was missing in the Olympic tournament, actually.
Not only did he play David James up front, but that was his plan. That wasn't an injury. They'd actually sat down and thought about that and presumably put it across the coaches. I've got this idea. Stick with me on this one. Can you imagine? I think it was Richard Cresswell who was on the bench as a striker.
Got to be gutted.
Imagine being him. It's like, this is my chance to secure European football for my club. Shit, the goalkeeper's going on. Right, that's it, I'm out.
Yeah, Peter Crouch isn't such a bad plan B when David James might be.
But I think the thing with the appointment of Pearce, they weren't. I mean, I think the FA had put themselves in an awkward position by making him Capello's sort of English liaison, and I think there was a sense of wanting to appoint from within the FA. As France have historically done, not to appoint the club coach, but to look within. And I think there's actually some merit to that, not to appointing Pearce, but to promoting from within. So, I mean, something like Brian Eastick, I think there is an argument. I mean, you could say he's slightly old-fashioned, he's slightly 4-4-2. The football his England side played at the Under-20 World Cup, where they qualified from the group with 3-0 draws, wasn't the most thrilling football. But he is clearly a very good technical coach. He clearly knows how to work with young players. And maybe there is an argument to look to somebody like that rather than necessarily going for a club coach. Because I think there is such a major difference between club management and international management.
But weren't the results consistently good results of the England youth teams over the past 5 or 6 years? In a way, they forced the FA's hand a little bit. No?
Yeah, well, this is what I was going to say. To give Pearce a little bit of balance, he did take the under-21s to the semi-finals of the European Championships, to the final of the European Championships, where admittedly they got their pants pulled down. So there were certain things. And there is an argument that having someone like Pearce in charge of a bunch of surly teenage millionaires isn't necessarily a bad thing. He might instill some idea of pride and honour in there. But no, our gentleman friend is right. He hasn't got an awful lot on his CV, and I do fear for him now if he's booted out of the FA. I'm not sure what job he will get.
Well, let's move away from Olympic football, back even further to a tournament that was played in the summer called the European Championships. We got a tweet from Marcin Ostrowski, who is asking, do you think Italy is again among Europe's elite with Spain and Germany after their Euro 2012 campaign, or was it perhaps just a one-off? Maybe he forgot about the World Cup win a few years.
Yeah, I haven't forgotten.
No, of course not.
Neither has Marco Materazzi or
the lone Frenchman on the panel.
A few people. It's a tricky one because is the question related to the state of the Italian team or the state of Italian football, which are two very different things, which I think is one of the reasons why we're a little bit puzzled. Mm-hmm. Not by the fact that, a team that came with, on the back, a qualification where they conceded, I think, 2 goals in the whole qualification campaign, and suddenly turned on the gas and produced some of the best attacking football we've seen throughout all the competition, thanks to, I think, their manager. Mm-hmm. But if you compare what's been happening with the national team and what's happening with the domestic football, the distance between the two is so big in terms of achievement. That's where we are a bit puzzled. Yes, in terms of the national team, they are where they've been for a very long time. But unfortunately, you think that the floor is getting loads of worms in that floor, and it's giving way. If you look at, for example, the performances of the youth teams are nothing to shout about. If you look at the players who are supposedly going to come and take their place in that Nazionale in the next few years, you can't see them anywhere. I think Italy is, after Turkey, the country in which the Serie A clubs use young players the least. Italian young players the least. And the financial structure as well of Serie A is really dodgy. They're trying to find solutions. We've just seen at the moment, for example, Inter looking at outside investment from China. That's showing how bad it is and taking on horrible colours we were talking about for their away strip. So if you assess the state of the actual football, I wouldn't say it's disastrous, but it's very, very worrying. And is it an aberration, you think, the success of the national team, based on maybe a last great generation of players that they've got? If you look at the players who are going to retire very soon, that's basically the nucleus of that team that did so well. Take Gigi Buffon, gone. You can go through the whole team. Half of that team wouldn't be there at
if you say who are the truly top-class players in that Italy team, you'd say Buffon, Pirlo are both. They're not going to be there.
Absolutely.
Well, they might be there at the World Cup, but not going to be there at the World Cup after that, certainly. Then De Rossi, he's 28 now. Yeah, he's not that great. He's good, but he's not great. Balotelli, who knows what he may become. And apart from that, it's a series of decent players who, to be fair, played extremely well in the Euros. And great credit to Prandelli for finding tactical structure to get the best out of them.
Mind you, if you believe the British media, then teenage starlet Andrea Pirlo is the player. It was like no one had ever heard of him. The press went absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
Look at him, look at the passes he plays. He's been around for a bit.
Yeah, but he's never played in the Premier League, though.
Maybe there is
Who
a
was it
slightly...
who said that? Was it Phil Brown?
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
He said he's never left his home. I think he's homophobic.
But I mean, there's a strange thing about Italy that they seem perpetually to be underrated. I mean, even the '82 team. The '82 team, you look back at it, and you look at Zoff and Bergami and Scirea and Cabrini and Conte and Rossi. I mean, that's a ridiculously good side.
Absolutely.
And yet, it went into that tournament with no expectations at all. So, I mean, Italy seems to be a team I guess because of the mess of their domestic games that we habitually underrate. And I guess, with Conte perhaps now facing a 10-month ban, what's that going to do to Juve? Milan selling off pretty much everybody. What's that going to do to them? I mean, you start looking at Roma, who've bought adequately well and have appointed the Czech madman Zeman, which is a good thing, but he is... he's not a level-headed man who would normally win your championships in Serie A, but he actually might do it this season.
I think the saddest thing is that after the last scandal, a lot of people, myself included, had switched off from Italian football because if it was bent and there was no point watching it, if there's match fixing going on, I'm not really interested. So I moved on to other things, and last season was the first season in years I'd watched closely, and it's fantastic. You've got half the teams playing three at the back and all different variations of three at the back. It's technically exciting. It's not by any means boring. You only have to watch one Napoli game to know that it's not boring Italian football. And now the shit has hit the fan again, and the whole thing's soiled. And that is going to have an impact, not least for, and I hate to bring this kind of thing up in a discussion about football, but foreign TV rights, which we've seen in England are a huge resource, a huge helping hand in attracting the best players. And yeah, they're going to have problems hanging on to people now.
I mean, the great strength Italy does have is in its coaches. I mean, you think of how many, even in England with Mancini and Di Matteo, Ancelotti at PSG, plus a load of good coaches in Serie A as well. That is the one strength they really have left is the coaching strength, which is tribute to Coverciano.
Could they lose it precisely because they're losing the financial power?
Well, so those coaches move overseas, absolutely, yeah.
Remains to be seen. A question from the floor. Anybody got a question? Hands up. Not currently. Okay, well, we'll move on with a couple of questions here. Now then, if you could regenerate any footballer from the past and reinstate him into your team, who would it be? Now, Jonathan's a Sunderland fan, Philippe supports Arsenal, and Iain supports Southend.
This isn't going to go well, is it?
Jonathan.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the present Sunderland team, and I guess you still say bring Charlie Hurley back, just for everything he represents, and we do need a strong centre back probably.
Not Asamoah Gyan.
I think he's retired to play semi-pro football now.
Does he? Right. Okay.
I mean, maybe the temptation, Shackleton, but would he be too maverick? Would he work in the modern game? Where would you play him? Could he and Sessegnon play together? I suspect probably not.
I think you're thinking too much into this. This is not going to happen.
we could be here sometime.
If Sessegnon leaves, Shackleton's exactly the man we want.
Well, a retired player.
But yeah, I'll say Charlie Hurley for a hugely powerful centre half, a great ball player, somebody who scored goals from corners, and a great icon of the club.
Okay, Philippe, Arsenal.
Ray
Parlour?
No, perhaps not. It depends if you give me a cut-out date, because I would say probably an awful lot of the 2003-2004 sides, obviously.
Yeah. You've got a lot more to choose from.
I'll have Henry back, I'll have Bergkamp back. But if I'm being sentimental, not just sentimental, but I would love to have Liam Brady back.
Right.
Yeah. For purely sentimental reasons. Otherwise, if you're looking at the team today and what it lacks, perhaps, I wouldn't mind seeing a Tony Adams back.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. For one reason, which is a very sad reason, is the fact that the captain's armband, which is something which was of such huge meaning for Arsenal fans, has been consistently demeaned by the people who've worn it recently. and that Wenger is very obviously somebody who has no idea of what it actually means to be Arsenal captain in the eyes of the fans, and which is why we've had Marwan Shamak captained Arsenal. Believe it or not, I've seen Marwan Shamak wear the armband of Arsenal Football Club, and it felt really weird. So Tony
Awful
come
as well,
back.
I'd imagine. Yeah.
Sorry.
Awful as well, I'd imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, no, he was. He had one of his normal games, so he was.
Oh God.
Yeah,
Was it that bad?
it was that bad. It was probably worse than that. And then when he was substituted, and he didn't know who to pass the armband to, and I think it was lying on the floor for a few seconds before it was picked up by another player. It was really horrible.
Yeah.
So I'll have Tony Adams.
Okay, Tony Adams then.
Absolutely.
Ian.
Well, I'm a Southend fan, so to be honest, we'd take Shamak. We'll take Shamak right now. That'd be fine.
You can have him.
Yeah, I think he's just about. We're not very good. I don't know if many of you have seen Southend. I don't blame any of you for that because we're really not very good. We came fourth last season and we're still awful, absolutely awful. It is pretty much 4-5-1 big bloke and punt it at him all day.
Which league?
We're in the 4th division.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The old fourth division.
Old fourth.
League 2 if we're polishing turds. We're really very bad. I think Stan Collymore obviously would stand out, not least because he's absolutely enormous. He's 6'3" and built like a tank, and quick and great close control, magnificent finish, a wonderful, tender and considerate lover, all things considered.
I was waiting until when you would wait.
I interviewed Stan Collymore actually a couple
Please
of
tell the
weeks ago.
story.
I was a bit tight for time. I was on a long journey, so I interviewed him from a car park. But very appropriate. It wasn't on the phone. He was just outside up against the window.
Did you let him in the car?
Well, I tried to turn the wipers on, see if that would get rid of him. But it's like, it was awful.
Yeah. Okay.
Traumatic. Collymore, but also Chris Powell, who may not be very famous up here, a silky-footed left back who was more than just a great player. He was a terrific servant to the club and a magnificent man, constantly working in the community. And I don't think there's any Southend fan who wasn't almost moved to tears by him taking Cheltenham back to the 2nd division. He really is a club legend. So we'll just get him back because he's
As
nice.
a player manager?
Yeah, he could probably still get a place in the team. I think he's only 44.
Favourite was Sven. His favourite was Sven, wasn't he? Left back for England for a bit.
3 caps.
3?
Yes.
Blimey.
Tears for everyone.
Go Howley. Indeed. Let's go back to the tweets. We've got one from Stephen Gore, and he's saying the following players have left La Liga over the past 3 summers: 2010, David Silva; 2011, Juan Mata; 2012, Santi Cazorla. So with some of the best players in the league leaving in the last few summers, and most of the clubs outside the top 2 struggling financially, can Spanish football continue in its current state and survive? Big words.
Well,
Philippe.
A short answer would be no. The current season is probably might start a week late again, like it did last year, because of yet more problems this time, which have to do with the broadcasting rights and broadcasters, and some terrible kerfuffle with MediaPro who own the broadcasting rights, and so the season might be a week late. Last year it was because of unpaid wages to the players. A situation which, by the way, hasn't been resolved properly. If you look at the finances of the clubs, it's absolutely appalling, and you would even include Barcelona in there. And one of the biggest problems they have is that an awful lot of the debt these clubs have is towards the state in terms of social security payments and tax, and that until recently, because of the political importance of all these clubs in their regions, not just really in their regions, their provinces, the state was not in a position where they could say you have to pay, because obviously their electorate would say, well, come on, you cannot attack, Real Betis, or you cannot attack Athletic Bilbao or whatever. Whereas now the situation has changed. The government has asked for these monies to be paid back, and paid back swiftly, which means that most of the clubs are now in a situation where they simply can't think of a way to go forward. Look at what's happening with Malaga, who not that long ago was seen as a potential contender to break the big 2, or big 3 if you add Valencia, and will now have to sell all their best players. I mean, Santi Cazorla is one, but there'll be others going out. So financially, it's absolutely tragic. The total debt is 628 million pounds sterling just to the state, to which you can add probably another 2.5 billion which is owned to various banks. Some of those banks will call in the loans, some others won't do it, like Caixa Catalunya won't do it with Barca. But the situation is completely unfeasible. You cannot have, and that's the big problem, you cannot have a league that functions solely on two clubs. It's a kind of, I know it's a bit of a cliche, become a bit of a cliche, but Spain is a bit like a rich or pseudo-rich Scotland, and which is not exactly a recipe for success, is it?
Yeah. Well, now
so the exodus will carry on because apart from the two big ones, the type of wages that top players can command, like Casola, simply the lesser clubs can't afford that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the problem's twofold when you have a situation like that where two clubs are so far ahead of the rest. One is to do with TV rights, and it's a long-term issue. It might take 5, 6, 7 years. Maybe the financial crisis in Spain will precipitate that. But it actually just becomes bad to watch. And you'll get your Barcelona and your Real Madrid diehards, of whom there are lots in the Americas and in Asia, and maybe in Africa as well. But I mean, personally, I turn on the Spanish football on a Saturday night, and Barcelona is 3-0 after 20 minutes. There's other football on other channels I'd rather watch that's competitive rather than just watching Barcelona hammering teams. And eventually, if enough people feel like that, and surely they do, because nobody, it's not fun to watch Barcelona winning 7-0 every week, then the ratings go down and those rights are worth less.
And the funny thing is, there's people in English football who actually want this for us. Liverpool, I'm looking in your direction.
In terms of negotiating the TV rights on part of the club rather than the league as a whole.
Well, one of the few good things the English Premier League has done is to split all of the foreign revenue equally between the 20 clubs, to take the domestic revenue, put it in 3 different pots, one which is split on a match-by-match basis, one which goes to prize money, and one which is split equally between all 20 clubs. And then Iain at Liverpool suddenly piped
more
up.
than 20 clubs, because you shouldn't forget the parachute payments, which are a crucial part of the system.
Yeah, and then you have Iain popping up saying that because on some arbitrary level, Liverpool are still, in his mind at least, one of the biggest clubs in the country, they should take a larger slice of the pie. They've got quite a lot of pie already. They're more than their plate can take. But there is a serious danger if people like that get their way that will follow the Spanish thing, because I'm like Jonathan. I watched the German league, I was watching the Italian league, but when it comes to the Spanish league,
you might even watch Ligue 1.
Oh yeah, this season.
Well,
it's coming on,
might as well. The other thing as well for Spain, which is often forgotten, it is the most expensive league to go and watch. The average ticket price is far higher than the average ticket price in England.
I didn't know that.
It is.
Even outside of Barcelona?
71 euros is the average. It was a study done by a Spanish magazine. 71 euros is the price, average price to go and watch a game. And I include in that, you would include in that teams which are not doing like Cadiz.
Isn't Spain's unemployment running at a double figure?
Yeah, and also the fact is that you've got the unemployment rate in the under 25s is something like between 40 and 45%. Yeah. So how people can afford to go there? I mean, they literally bleed themselves, the socios, to go and get a season ticket. As well, the socio system, which could protect the clubs, let's not forget it's only used by 4 clubs in Spain: Real, Barcelona, Osasuna, and Athletic Bilbao, if I'm not mistaken. So the rest are completely subjected to the vagaries of the economy. See what happened with Villarreal. Villarreal was built with the money from the ceramics industry. The building industry, the construction industry falls, it's destroyed. Therefore, there's no need for ceramics anymore. Villarreal disappears.
There we are. Any questions from the audience? Anybody about anything? Yes, we've got a couple. Mr. Microphone, where are you? There you are. There's a man just to your right. Let's go for him first.
This is more to Philippe. Is there any resentment in France towards Paris Saint-Germain and their circumstances with all the money at the moment?
Paris Saint-Germain.
We were going to come to that in a minute.
Yeah. You've ruined the running order.
I've got a special prop. I brought a recent edition of my beautiful magazine, France Football, and you can see PSG being represented by this rather large blue elephant, not in a China shop. It probably would buy everything anyway rather than crushing it, but crushing the rest of the competition. Yes, I mean, trying to explain the kind of resentment that PSG is creating in France. I say you would have to add Chelsea plus Manchester City plus any I don't know, any big spending club multiplied by 10, and then you would have an idea of how much people want PSG to fail. There are many reasons for that. First of all, it's a club that is really hated down the country. It's a very recent club, only formed in the early 70s, and which from very early on was a club that relied on big money to exist. Of course, the club is hated by all Marseille fans, who are the most numerous in the country. Then, when people found a modicum of sympathy for them with what Antoine Kombouaré was doing, Antoine Kombouaré was sacked when the club was actually top of the league, replaced by Carlo Ancelotti, who managed to lose the title to Montpellier, which was a day of celebration throughout the whole of France. And then you see the recruitment, and actually we're getting something more serious here. People were thinking, well, actually maybe it's a good thing that we have suddenly outside investors putting an awful lot of money into French clubs. Because, in fairness, that hasn't really happened so far. We've had a few experiments which haven't been very successful in Nantes. There's been one in Grenoble with a group of Japanese investors. PSG, there was Colony Capital and some American investors as well. Didn't quite work. But the problem is the money that Paris Saint-Germain is putting in the game is actually not money that Paris Saint-Germain is putting in the game. It's buying players from abroad. You've seen the recruitment this season has been absolutely extraordinary. Thiago Silva, Lavezzi, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, and we've heard this afternoon that they nicked Lucas Moura from Sao Paulo from underneath the nose of Manchester United for something like 38 million euros, which is an awful lot of money for a player who is by and large unproven, really.
Well, that does bring a smirk to your face, though, doesn't it? Nicking a player from Manchester United.
Especially a French team nicking a promising youngster
Well,
from Manchester United.
You know, the thing is that it's going to be interesting for Michel Platini, my favorite man, because he's going to have some explaining to do, not just about the fact that his son Laurent is working for Qatar Sports Investment, but also about the fact that he's been not very vocal, shall we say, in his condemnation of what PSG is doing. If you compare it, and it's a big chapter, if you compare, for example, the Manchester City plan of domination, it is actually, I think, a very reasonable, very rational, and completely defensible plan. I'm being the devil's advocate here. It's a long-term strategy which has been devised over a large period of time, and they waited and waited and waited, and it's very clear what's going on.
Yeah.
They used the turbo to start the machine. Now they're going into cruise control. Paris Saint-Germain is crazy. They've spent over 120 million now this season, and not a penny on a French player. Not one penny has got in the French game. And when the team starts the season, there will be only one French player in the starting lineup, the captain, Jallet. And he'll be lucky to be in the starting lineup. So, you know, you can understand why people in France have been going on so much about the DCNG and the necessity to have financial fair play. It's going to change everything in French football, and suddenly, PSG. So,
I mean, I can't really add to this, but why did Paris not have a major club before PSG?
They did. Racing.
So what happened to them?
The war.
Right.
Their chairman. I mean, I'm not. I don't think I'm wrong in saying that the great Hogan was. He was a coach of Racing. Well, of course, Racing was part of this aristocracy of European clubs in the 30s, playing regularly against Arsenal. And then their chairman, Mr. Levy, was killed on the front in 1940, and the club basically dissolved after his death. He was the man behind it. And afterwards, there have been numerous attempts, like Racing Paris-Matra. Red Star was a biggish club at one point. But Paris is not a football city. There's not a single proper football stadium in Paris.
Will
the
there be
Parc des
enough?
Princes is just on the periphery.
Will there be enough for Zlatan Ibrahimovic to keep him entertained there?
I think so.
Yeah. Ian,
I think he could just give a phone call to his old mate Ronaldinho.
And get him
we
back
can
over.
give all the good addresses in the 16th arrondissement.
What could possibly go wrong?
Ian, has Leonardo got the best job in football? He's got an endless checkbook and he's sporting director. He looks like a man who's having a lot of fun.
He always looks like a man who's having a lot
Indeed.
of fun. But if I look like him, I think I'd look like I've had a lot of fun as well.
Fun would find you.
He's basically playing Football Manager now, isn't he?
Isn't he? Yeah.
Do you see the seamless link into the book that comes out in 2 days from all good bookshops, £9? He's just sitting there, just going, you, and I will have you. No, it's a wonderful job, and it comes without any pressure at all.
Yeah.
As well, because
The
Carlo's
difference-
going to take the fall.
It is succeeding this year because last year was really funny. I think there were 126 players who were mentioned and as possible targets or as targets, and every single one of them was missed. And in the end, they had to buy. I mean, they paid 42 million for Pastore, who was the big catch. This has changed this year. Suddenly, they've got the big guys, And as soon as you've got one, the others will follow.
And it's not like anyone can say, oh, yeah, but you've never tried it, have you? Because he's managed both AC and Inter.
Oh, yeah.
So
He's upset
he's got the
people.
CV, he's got everything. And he's really good looking.
Yeah.
I don't know if I
And
mentioned
people
that,
seem to
yeah.
have totally forgotten the elbow that smashed Tabamous' cheek in the
I have
1994
not.
World Cup. Poor Slaven Bilic fell over at the wrong moment and is cursed by that. The first thing anybody says, you think, yeah, I think Slaven Bilic is quite a good manager. Oh, but he cost Laurent Blanc his place in it. As if Laurent Blanc is his great saint. And poor Tab Ramos, his teeth are still all over Pasadena. And nobody remembered Tab Ramos. Nobody.
Not in this room. Leonardo's looks cover a multitude of sins. Now, we had another question, didn't we? Man in the tie. It was about Paris Saint-Germain as well. Any questions not about Paris Saint-Germain? Okay, man over here. Here he comes. Marvellous.
Obviously, you mentioned Michel Platini earlier on, and he's being groomed as Blatter's successor, which sounds sort of ominous. But is there any chance at all that he could have a more positive influence on FIFA's winning of the game? Or is it just going to be a case that in 5 years' time we'll find him making lewd comments about women's football and it's just going to go down the same road?
Jonathan.
Well, I mean, Philippe's the man with the strong opinions, so let me paint the case for the... I can't make the case for the defence of Michel Platini.
No, there's things you can...
I mean, I think it's a terrible thing when you see somebody who you really respected as a player becoming such a terrible administrator. And I think even if there is nothing odd about his son working for Qatar Sports Investment, even if there's nothing odd in Qatar getting his vote for the World Cup in 2022, even if that is just a horrible, horrible coincidence, his habit of just saying things without any thought. I mean, his point that he made during the Euros that maybe in 2020 it should be held in 12 different countries or 12 different cities across Europe. It's actually not a bad point, because if your two semi-final venues are by public transport a minimum of 7 hours apart, because there's no scheduled flight between Warsaw and Donetsk. So if you have a private jet, yeah, you can do it in 2 hours. Any normal person, it takes you a minimum of 7 hours if you get on that flight changing in Borisoville. And, that's 300 people can do that. So if you have your semi-final venues that far apart, then actually, why not just have them in London and Paris? Because that's like 2 hours by train. Why not have it in, I don't know, Brussels and Copenhagen, or Brussels and Amsterdam, which is, again, an hour and a half, 2 hours by train?
Not even that.
Not even that. I mean, that actually makes more sense. So in that sense, the idea he put forward isn't a bad one, but he just blurted it out in the middle of a press conference, and you could see all the UEFA wonks going, what? And that hadn't been discussed. Nobody had thought about that. There's no sense of process with him. I mean, Philippe, I know you've got far more examples and far more damaging examples.
Well, the financial fair play was... I mean, even you might agree and think that it's a fantastic idea, but he literally came up with the idea just like that and just passed the dossier on to his advisors, who said, Michel, are you aware of there's such a thing as European law? Yeah, you take care of that. So basically, he comes up with all these crazy ideas. I mean, all that he said about the Qatar World Cup, about it should be the Gulf World Cup, he hadn't bothered to talk to the Qataris about it, even though he had dinner with the Emir of Qatar and Nicolas Sarkozy at the Élysée Palace. The idea of switching it to the winter, he hadn't talked to anybody about it either. I mean, it's extraordinary. He shoots from the hip. But that's part of his strategy in a funny way. He's an untouchable.
I guess the one thing that you can say in favour of Blatter is that he is an excellent politician. He's very good at controlling the public image. He's very, up to a point.
Is he?
Well, yeah. Given how bad things are, the fact that so many countries other than Britain seem quite happy to go along with it. I think he's very clever at manipulating public moods. He's very clever at getting rid of his rivals, getting rid of his enemies. I don't think Platini has that now. Maybe he'll get advisors who can help him with that. But I can't see how Platini will ever last more than one term as FIFA president without being outvoted.
I mean, the thing is that but very briefly, the other thing is that Sepp Blatter has put himself in the slipstream of João Avalanche, and everybody remembers that, and everybody reminds him of that. Michel Platini placed himself in the slipstream of Sepp Blatter, and nobody ever talks about that particular side of his politicking and careering. When he was still a player, he had already started putting in place the elements of his campaign, which will bring him first the World Cup, the French team, the organizing committee of the 1998 World Cup, of which he was an important member but not the chairman, and so on. But he's extremely good at covering his tracks afterwards.
I think also there's two positives that he has brought. One is the alteration to the Champions League that prior to a couple of years ago, if you finished fourth in your domestic league, you basically had a piss easy game and then you were straight on to where the big money was. And he's rejigged that now so that the teams who sneak in fourth now have to start playing each other, which is why Arsenal suddenly had to play Udinese. Which was a really tough draw. So you've had a lot of unfamiliar names suddenly popping up in the Champions League because he's left the back door ajar for them to get in. And that's got to be a good thing to spread the wealth.
Didn't Everton have to play Villarreal before
Sorry?
Didn't Everton have to play Villarreal before the reform took place?
Well, they did, yeah.
Yes, that's what I mean. Villarreal had the coefficient and Everton had nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So Everton were in a position of being a nothing team.
Yeah.
That's probably that's why Manchester City was seeded fourth, because they had no coefficient. But your point about teams like Apoel suddenly popping up, I mean, it's a good thing in the sense that it spreads interest in the Champions League across Europe. It's great that Cypriot teams can make their mark. But what's the impact on the Cypriot League when they suddenly get the equivalent of 10, 12 years worth of revenue in 1 year?
Yeah, but
it destroys that league.
Yeah, but that horse is already bolted, doesn't it? Look at the English league and the top four and the difficulty in breaking into that.
I'm not
had
sure he
10
hasn't
years
just replaced one
now.
problem with another. I think these are connected problems.
Yes, there is a possibility that he's just spread the shit on a wider level. But at least it's spreading something.
Repeat
There's
that.
some more. Probably don't want to write that one down. But at least it's something. There's some even a token gesture to stop the idea that UEFA are in it for the interest of about 14 teams. And on the other hand, as well, he does like a drink, and that's always.
We'll
nice
definitely
to
get some good quotes out of it, certainly. Another question. Some others had their hands up. Gentleman over there. We've got the microphone.
Given the rather depressing thoughts on Platini, how can we reform FIFA and change? What can we do as fans, or how can we change? Because it's such a cesspit at the moment.
There's a cupboard at the back. It's full of pitchforks. We've put some seats
And we're
on
off to Switzerland after. You're either with us or against us. Iain, would you like to try and...
Looking at me like that wasn't my serious answer.
I'm interested in your pitchfork idea. No,
well, I'd like to see some kind of accountability rather than every time they get caught with their fingers in the till, holding their own inquiry with people that they've appointed to oversee that inquiry and then give the results in private. And then to have no one actually listen to the results, which include the fact that the man who's behind everything actually knew about all the corruption in the first place and essentially sanctioned it. That, I don't know, I'm old-fashioned, maybe that just doesn't seem right. Maybe we could have some kind of accountability with at least some form of voting process for individual FIFA representatives, and some kind of structure to the election that stops the farce of having one man with having one name on the ballot. Well, the funniest thing about that, though, was the fact that Blatter still treated that as a hard-won political victory. He came out, he received flowers, he waved to the crowd. That was remarkable.
well, in the words of Brian Clough, a win's a win's a win.
And, he didn't concede.
That's
very true. He had an adversary, he had a rival though, but he got rid of him before the election. That was really sweet.
It's
It was
funny.
Mohammed bin Hammam, of course.
Yes, and it's funny how an awful lot of his rivals tend to go that way.
Now I think possibly the only way you could do that is by simply breaking away from FIFA. I can't see any other way to change anything.
There was a moment when Chuck Blazer was forced to resign, the US delegate who I don't think is a beacon of probity by any means, but if you think of how large the US market is, if they could have brought Mexico with them, and Mexico's TV market is huge, if England and the other British nations could have gone with them, maybe some of the good Europeans in inverted commas, then FIFA faced with a fracture has a big problem. But that's a huge risk, because what if the World Cup goes on and it turns out to actually work quite well with England, the USA, and Mexico and Sweden?
What if we end up with a situation like cricket with Kerry Packer, where you suddenly have two complete rivals? And
the one with the more money wins, and I'm suspecting that the one involving Mexico, USA, and Britain has a very good chance of winning. But I think one of the problems
with one proviso is the fact that most of the commercial agreements for the World Cups to come are already in place, and that includes the Qatar World Cup. in 2022. Most of the commercial agreements are very, very long term, and to break them would be almost impossible.
So, has anybody explained how the alcohol companies are going to work in terms of sponsorship with Qatar?
Very carefully.
Yes. It's Heineken with FIFA?
Is it Heineken or Carlsberg? Heineken, yeah.
Carlsberg, perhaps. They will have the right to sell their products in the fan zones and in the stadiums. So there will be the FIFA anyway. FIFA law becomes the country's law when the World Cup is taking place. So
have we had any update on if football fans are gay in Qatar? Are they allowed?
I don't think they shout about it.
Is everyone going to be getting increasingly tetchy?
A huge problem FIFA has is that every member has one vote, which seems fair, and I'm not really sure another way of doing it. What that means is people like Jack Warner can get a cabal of tiny Caribbean islands where you have maybe 2 teams they play, then you have to play an average of 4 games a year over a 4-year period to maintain your FIFA license. So they play these ridiculous tin pot friendlies among themselves. They never actually bother even to enter World Cup qualifying. They don't even enter Gold Cup qualifying. And yet that guarantees Jack Warner 17, 20, 23 votes. And that's a huge problem. Do you do it proportionally by population? But then China would suddenly, and India would suddenly be massively important, which doesn't seem right. Do you do it by World Cup wins? I mean, it's a very, very difficult way.
You could think of a multi-tiered membership, which is what we have in cricket. So you have affiliate members, associate members, and then full members. And that certainly could be put in relationship to the results of those teams in international competitions.
They may be forced in that direction because of Karl-Heinz Rummenigge and the European Club Association, is it?
ECA, yeah.
Who are beginning to make noises that sound like they're not going to release any of their players for any international football. So the danger is that FIFA needs to get its act together.
Well, that is another way of bringing FIFA down, is if the clubs actually band together against it. But
without the players,
they're going to be acting in their own interest, right? They're not going to be acting for the good of the game, for the good of humanity.
But the reason why ECA used this blackmail was it was a tool. It was to give them leverage in the discussions with UEFA, but not FIFA. And when it came to get a bigger slice of the gâteau of the European Championships, which they got 100 million this time, and in 2016 I think it goes up to 150 million given to clubs by UEFA, which is basically a bribe to say, calm down, you get your money, that's all right. And also we don't change the structure of the Champions League, which is the one thing they're in bed for together, and which is favourable to everybody at the moment.
Yes, indeed. Any more questions from the floor? Yes, the chap over there.
Yeah. Just like to ask the panel, do you believe that Martin O'Neill has the potential to have the same longevity at Sunderland as an Arsene Wenger or, say, an Alex Ferguson, or is he purely an impact manager?
Oh, I didn't think it was that ridiculous. Newcastle fan at the back, perhaps. Jonathan, we must come to you for this.
Yeah, I mean, it won't surprise you to learn that I'm worried. Sunderland had that great start under Martin. I think we got 22 points in the first 10 games. And so I suggested to The Guardian maybe I should do a piece looking at the stats and looking at what Sunderland are doing different in this 10 games to what they've done in the first 13 games that Bruce had last season. I looked at the stats and they did nothing different at all. The passing stats were the same, the possession stats were the same, tackle completion was the same, crossing was the same. The only thing that was different was chance conversion. And if you think about those games, the number of times the ball was lashed in from 25, 30 yards was ridiculous. Now that can be a sign of confidence, which I guess, you do give the manager credit. I mean, I can't honestly believe that he suddenly kind of done a huge amount of work on the training field and made them able to score from 25 yards when they hadn't before. But if your points are coming from long-range shots, then you're not actually controlling the game any better. You're just getting a little bit luckier, and that will happen at times. And sure enough, towards the end of the season, there was a regression to the mean. So that's the worrying side of things. But you look at his record. His record on signings is questionable, maybe. He left Celtic with a load of players who were on very high wages he needed getting rid of. Villa, I think certainly the perception was he'd overspent. He certainly hasn't overspent this summer. But apart from that doubt, his record is superb. I mean, until last season, he'd never finished outside the top half of the Premier League with any club he'd taken charge of in the Premier League. Which, given how long he was at Leicester, is a remarkable achievement. So, maybe I'm just pessimistic, but I worry it'll be the usual scrap for 2 years and then move on. But having said that, if Sunderland stay up this season, it'll be 8 years in a row in the Premier League. And that'll be their longest stint in the top flight since they were first relegated in 1958. So in a sense, this is the golden age. I mean, it doesn't feel like it. But
things are looking up. The golden age, ladies and gentlemen.
I do think the question's almost less about O'Neill and more about Sunderland and what they can realistically do in the state that football is now. I mean, you have an incredible fan base. There were people hammering Sunderland in that god-awful season of hardly any points and saying, God, look. Yeah. the really, really bad one. Was it 13 points? 11 points. Good God. And people were saying,
15,
look.
11, 15, I don't know. Was it 15 or 19?
We'll agree it's bad.
Yeah, it was bad.
Might I remind you where we are?
People were looking at the stadium saying, look at all the empty seats. But Sunderland were actually getting 30,000 people in every other week to watch a team finishing on a points total we haven't quite agreed with yet.
Well, there is a quick stat for you from Dave, the lad with the massive head at the back.
What a beautiful head it is.
Of teams who failed to qualify for Europe in the last 20 years, no team in the whole of Europe has such a high average attendance as Sunderland.
That is a huge head. That's like one head balanced on top of another.
I think that's the microphone.
Oh, right. Gotcha. But, sorry, the point I was making, I'll be brief, was that you get people in to watch Sunderland even when they're not playing well. There's a massive stadium there. There is a lot of potential. But when you look at financial stats, as Philippe will doubtless know, Arsenal, for every home game, pull in £3 million. The season before last, for the entire season of home games, Sunderland pulled in £13 million because you can't charge the same amount up here as you can in London, and you can't get that corporate reach. There's just not enough corporations willing to pay £1,000 a head for truffles and prawn sandwiches up in this part of the world. They're always going to be limited by that unless football changes, and I think you'll have a situation where O'Neill steadily lifts Sunderland up to about 7th or 8th, and then will fancy, and I mean this with no disrespect to a club I have great affection for, but he will fancy one last crack at a really big job.
The other thing is that when you talk about legacy, which is the word you used in your question, you have to look at his record when it comes to youth formation, which is, in fairness, not that great at all. And I know Sunderland has got a very good setup at the moment, but wherever O'Neill has been, and I'm thinking, well, the three bigger clubs he's been at, Leicester, Celtic or Aston Villa, he doesn't seem to be interested at all in the youth policy of the club. Whereas Sir Alex Ferguson and Wenger certainly do. So which is one of the reasons I don't think you could use the word legacy in the same sense for Martin O'Neill and for the other two.
One more question from the floor. We're running out of time. Hand straight up over there.
Would you say that with the audiences they're getting and the non-Europeans playing in the Champions League, that a World Cup will still define a player's legacy?
Good question. Jonathan?
I think... I wrote a piece just before the Euros for the New Statesman, which is a slightly odd experience. They clearly weren't looking at the normal football angle. And they said, will we see anything new tactically in the Euros? And confidently I said, no, not a chance. And of course then we see Spain playing with Fabregas centre forward. But I think what I did when I wrote the piece, before being horribly wrong, was to go back through every tournament and say, was there a major tactical innovation there? And I got back to 1974 before I found one. And I know Ajax had been using total football from the late 60s onwards. But I think the time at which the rest of the world really became aware of it and really began to understand it was the 1974 World Cup. So, in a sense, 1974 was the last time that the international game led the club game. I think it was a long process, and I think that the Champions League is clearly a better standard of football now than the World Cup. I think that's probably been true for about 20 years. So say you had a 20-year transition from 1970 to 1990, where they were neck and neck. since 1990, I think the other club game's taken over. So, I mean, somebody like Lionel Messi is clearly an absolutely brilliant player. What he's won by the age of 24, 25 is absolutely extraordinary. Will he still be considered an extraordinary player in 10 years' time if he doesn't win a World Cup? Yeah. There'll be the bit in brackets afterwards that says, but he never really did it with Argentina. And actually, the reception he gets in Argentina, I think, is only just beginning to change, only just becoming favourable.
Did the hat-trick play a role against Brazil?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was at the Copa America last year, and I was in Santa Fe, which is Messi's home state. He's from Rosario, which is about, 150 miles, say, from Santa Fe. But that's his home state. It's just where he's from. And before the game, the announcer's reading out the team. It says, and in the number 10 shirt, the best player in the world, Lionel Messi. Kind of quite moderate applause. And in the number 11, the player of the people, El Jugador del Pueblo, Carlos Tevez. And the place went mad, the place went mental, because they still prefer Tevez to Messi, because he's seen as embodying the traits of Argentinian football. He's seen as having played better for Argentina than Messi has. So even though you look at what they've achieved at club level, and Messi is streets ahead, even if you look at them as players and you'd say Messi streets ahead, there was still then a perception that Tevez was the better player. And so I guess in that regard, Messi needed a good World Cup, or needs a good World Cup or international tournament to really, win in favour back in Argentina. But as Philippe says, the hat-trick against Brazil, that goes a long way to helping that. And also Tevez, his problems have although I think there's still significant support from Argentina, that's starting to be eroded. There's starting to be a sense of, this lad's got to sort himself out.
What's whispering going on? Chaps? Would you like to share with everybody?
We were just chatting, sorry. The question was World Cup and Champions League, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Where will a player find his legacy?
I think you only have to look at the last Champions League final and the feeling. I hope there's no Chelsea fans in here, otherwise I may need an escort home.
Plenty of
there
them
any
will
Chelsea
be
fans?
watching on YouTube on the Blizzard website later,
Oh,
so
excellent.
you can be
I'll
assured
be
you get
safe.
the death
I'll
threats,
be
no
behind the
problem.
sofa by then. You watched Chelsea in the Champions League final, and when they won, and John Terry made his quick change into his kit, so that later generations will assume that he was on the pitch at the time. He's clever. He's not as stupid as people make out. 20 years' time. Did anyone really feel warmed? Did anyone feel united in a feeling of great British pride that one of our number had stood up? No one felt it at all. Sometimes you get it in the Champions League with Liverpool in 2005 for just sheer amazement that they could fashion that turnaround. But when a country wins a World Cup, it turns everything around. If England had made it to the World Cup final, you would be getting the kind of feel-good thing you get as Mo Farah crosses the line, probably times a few and drunker, I'd imagine. And nothing for all of the money that goes into the Champions League. I really don't think anything will ever eclipse that.
There you go. We'll finish off with a question which says, if you could replay a moment from footballing history and change the outcome, which moment would it be? Philippe.
I immediately thought Sevilla 1982, and I'm hesitating. It's either Schumacher being shown a red card, that would be great.
Yeah.
But it's also
unjust.
Yeah, absolutely. But also perhaps I think it's Karl-Heinz Förster, the bicycle kick, hitting the woodwork and going out or going, but it would have to be that game, and perhaps Schumacher being sent off would be very sweet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Iain.
Wembley dressing room, just before the Euro 96 semi-final, England against Germany, as Paul Gascoigne went to pick up his pair of size 8 football boots, I would be there and I would say, here's a pair of size 9, give them a go, see what happens, just go with it. He would probably wonder who I was and how I'd sneaked into the England dressing room with a pair of boots that didn't entirely fit. But he would toilet roll at the end.
But he'd thank you afterwards.
Oh, I think he would definitely thank me, because as he slid in on that ball that he wasn't quite expecting, as his toe stretched out, that extra bit of purchase. Oh, God.
Yeah, it still hurts now. Still hurts now. Jonathan.
No, I tried to think of a Sunderland example, and I guess it's John Dean.
There's too many. Oh, sorry.
John Dean being flagged for offside as he should have been in the 1985 World Cup final. or even just David Corner putting it out. I mean, either of those would have done. There's anything to stop the ball coming back and Nick Chandler hitting the shot that went in off Gordon Chisholm. But John Dean was offside. I mean, nobody talks about that.
Can I just ask, of all the moments in football history, you want to change a Milk Cup final?
Yeah. He's quite happy with his football history. Have you not read his work?
I did say I was looking for a Sunderland moment.
Right.
So I then thought, maybe the relegation playoff against Gillingham, Tony Cascarino missing one of those chances. But actually, I think the purgative year in Division 3 actually probably did us good in the long run. So the theory of the fortunate fall, actually eating the apple, although it was terrible, was also good because it taught us about evil and stuff. So I actually came back strangely to an England example, which is Bonetti not letting that Beckenbauer shot under his body in the 1970 World Cup quarter-final. Because if England had won that game, gone on to the semi-final, maybe they'd have lost against Italy. I think they probably would have beaten Italy and then lost to Brazil in the final. But the football England played in that tournament was absolutely magnificent football. They held the ball, they were really intelligent with their use of the ball, and maybe that would have instituted a different mentality to English football, rather than being seen as this one-off thing that they did in Mexico and then changed when they got home. Had they had more success with that, or more obvious success with that, had they not fallen apart, and who knows, West Germany maybe wouldn't have had the boost of their confidence, and they would have faded away, and we never have heard of them again.
A few ifs and buts. I'd probably go for Team GB winning the penalty shootout against South Korea, which would have been nice. That concludes our time here, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming. A big thanks to the Glass Centre, and of course, let's have a round of applause for Jonathan Wilson, Iain Macintosh, and Philippe Auclair. Oh, go on then. Who's the most unpopular man at Borussia Mönchengladbach matches? The man who says, "Give me a B."
The D hospital guy.
Yeah.
That's a polite chuckle out there, isn't it?
All right. I'm just warming him up. Who's the most popular man at a hospital? The ultrasound guy. Who's the most popular guy when he's not there? The hip replacement guy. Are we good? Thank goodness for that.